I pray that everyone who finds this video is ready to hear this message. And I pray that you may stick through the triggers, through the things that confront you, through the ways that you may be stung a little bit. Because today we're going to be talking about not just shadow work as you see in the title, but we're also going to be talking about purity culture, not just as a product of the evangelical Christian movement and as the product of misogyny itself, but also the purity culture that has infiltrated the spiritual community. And we have to remember that when it comes to our purpose, when it comes to what we are meant to share here on this planet, it's not just something that you choose, it's something that you're initiated into. And so that means that the initiation that you go through many times when it comes to your purpose, it's going to contain all iterations of the light and the dark of whatever topic in which you are being initiated into, right? Even if you think about an initiation in Ifa, if you're being initiated as a Yemoja priestess, a keeper of secrets of Oshun, a keeper of secrets of Shango, Eshu, you don't just learn about one face of these divinities. You learn also about all iterations of which these spirits take. And so your purpose is the initiation into the mysteries of your own being. And how does purity culture, how does, all these these things that come from patriarchal society, how do all these things come into play? Well, obviously, I just mentioned Ifa, which is the lifestyle, religion, technology that I practice. And we can't help but wonder why, whether it is Ifa, or whether it is Hinduism, or whether it is any lifestyle spiritual practice that speaks of multiple different faces of the divine, why are these things demonized? Don't worry, I'm gonna get to purity culture. Why are these things demonized? Why are we taught that these things are bad? Why are we taught that Santeria or any indigenous religion is inherently devil worship? Why is that? Why are we taught these things about idols and worshiping false gods and all these kind of things? It's because in colonized Christianity, in colonized Abrahamic religion, in colonized theology specifically, we're taught that God has one face. We're taught that God is this being, sky daddy, father figure that is nowhere near earth because we're too sinful, we're too dirty, there's just too much going on with us. Our bodies are impure, our desires are impure, our minds are impure. So God has gone away and God is in the sky. And we're taught that through rejecting the body, rejecting the darkness, rejecting all these inherent natural things about ourselves, that we maybe can get this man on the phone, right? But only you can get him on the phone through a priest. You could only get him on the phone through someone else's understanding of him. This creates so many different issues within our psyche and in our society. But one of the main issues that it teaches us is that number one, we are inherently sinful. That number two, our natural desires, our natural instincts, our natural energy is sin, is the devil itself. And that to be in alignment with God is to be pure. That God could only be seen when you're in a certain space, wearing the certain clothes and saying the certain words and praying hard enough. Have you ever felt like maybe you would be able to connect with God if you prayed hard enough? Has anyone ever told you to pray hard enough? Harder. You must pray harder. You must fast. You must do all these things. These notions aren't inherently evil, but they send a message to our subconscious. They send a message to our subconscious that we are inherently sinful and that there is one way to see God and there's one way to be connected with God. And so bring it back the question of why are religions that have multiple different faces of God, why are these demonized? Because if you're able to see how God has many faces, then maybe you'd be able to accept the many faces and iterations of yourself. If you're able to see that this creative force, this powerful force, doesn't just hold the father or masculine energy, but it holds the feminine. Think about an Ifa. God is not just in the river, God is in the mountains. God is not just in the thunder, God is at the crossroads. God is not just in the top of the ocean. God is at the bottom, Olokun, right? God is both light and dark. And so, if these powers that colonized us can convince us that God has one face, and that to get to God, you must be one way, and to connect with God, you must do one thing and follow one religion, and this is the way. And even if you follow it, you still need a savior to come get you and continue to guide you. Because you cannot trust yourself. You cannot trust your intuition. You cannot lean on your own understanding. You can't tap in here because God is not here. God is not here. These religions, these indigenous practices are demonized because if you could see God in all the different forms, then maybe you'd be able to honor and appreciate all the different forms of yourself. This is one of the first ways that purity culture begins. And I talked about this all in my free ebook. It's going to be in the bio, obviously. Free, all of it. But a lot of people think that purity culture began in the 90s as an evangelical Christian movement with the purity balls and the purity rings. But the idea of purity and the idea of cleansing ourselves and in original sin, it started with the book of Genesis, right? It started with Adam and Eve. Misogyny, this idea that a woman could be the inherent downfall of humanity. Maybe the serpent couldn't convince Adam, but the serpent could convince Eve. A woman could be the downfall of humanity. These ideas started in the book of Genesis. They're not inherently there, but the translation of these ideas is what fueled colonized theology. And so now let's get into purity culture. And now let's get into, and of course, we're going to move into why your shadow is the shaman, is the initiator into your purpose. Purity culture has been sprinkled and riddled all throughout New Age spirituality because we all inherently have religious trauma. We all have religious trauma whether we know it or not. Now, some people have more religious trauma than others, right? But we all have religious trauma whether you know it or not. And the reason why this is because we all, unless you live in Ethiopia or some other very few countries, less than a dozen, I believe, that were not colonized by a European power. We all live in colonized lands, on colonized lands. Lands that have been colonized, rather. And part of the tools of colonization wasn't just overthrowing, current systems of government, but one of the biggest tools of colonization was theology, was organized religion, was theology. Theology is the interpretation and study of religion. But the way that you translate these religions from different intentions, colonized theology, Christian supremacist theology, white supremacist theology, affects how that religion is then spread throughout the masses. And so when it comes to colonization, part of the way that these European powers colonized these lands was not just through the acquisition of economic assets. It was through the colonization of our minds. And the ways that they colonized our minds was through colonized theology, colonized Christianity. There is a form of Christianity that is not through a colonized lens, that honors both the mother and the father. There are forms of Islam, of Judaism, that exist beyond a colonized lens. But the version that all of us know and that is deeply embedded into our government, because it had to be, is colonized theology. And so if you can control someone's view of God, if you can control how someone relates to life itself, you can control their relationship with themselves. And if you can control someone's relationship with themselves, you can control how they act with others. You can control how they act in community. You can control how much they oblige or submit to a system or how much they don't. Right? We talk about this all in how to find your purpose 2.0. I'm getting heated up. But and so what ends up happening is we all get indoctrinated into colonized theology that inherently has iterations of misogyny, has been used to justify slavery, as we all know, as Black Americans, African Americans, has been used to perpetuate so many very interesting things, right? We've all been indoctrinated into this because it's been inherently ingrained in our government, not because it's the right way, but because it's the way that forces us to submit in the way that they want us to. And so we all have religious trauma. From being in these societies, we all have religious trauma. And one of the ways that religious trauma is really embodied and acts in our lives, you may think, oh, I'm spiritual. I'm done with my religious trauma. Even me, I grew up in Buddhist temple. I did not grow up in going to church. I'm like, oh, I don't really have that much religious trauma, right? But just because we live in this society, we all inherently have religious trauma. The way that religious trauma comes up is through purity culture. It's through the ways that we view ourselves. It's through rejecting God within us. It's through searching for validation because we're taught that our power is somewhere outside of ourselves. We're taught that we must be a certain way in order for us to connect with this power that's outside of ourselves. And this has been riddled into New Age spirituality through the idea of love and light and alignment. And the idea, people selling you manifestation courses are talking about manifestation and saying, well, you must align your thoughts. And then, you have to cleanse yourself of all these bad beliefs. And then you have to do this. And then you have to do that. And I will be the first one to say, when I first came into my space of teaching, it made sense at first, right? So I may have posts talking about this as well. I started my platform almost 10 years ago. So I may have posts talking about this as well. It's a beautiful thing to grow. But that slowly comes into the space of trying to fit yourself into a box, not in the name of love and light, not in the name of alignment, but underneath it all is purity. For Black people especially, I'm going to speak on our Black people. My Black people. I'm going to speak on it. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. You come into the New Age spiritual community, we have the hoteps, beautiful, beautiful. You got all these people, we have to be natural, we have to do this. Yeah, that's beautiful, we should be more natural. And then, you have to lock your hair. And then you have to wear these certain clothes. And then you can't like this, or you can't like that. And then you have to be heterosexual. Because man and woman, we are onk, right? We have to do all these things. We could only like the natural things. We could only like the ways that we are kings, we are queens. Beautiful, beautiful. But anytime that we try to mold ourselves, anytime that we try to force ourselves into these boxes, we're coming into a very dangerous territory here, because then it's not anymore about alignment. It's not anymore about doing things that are the best for you. It's about shame and purity. I can't tell you how many comments I've had. Why don't you lock your hair? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? When people learn that I'm gay, what's going on here? Right? People learn that I like the things that I like, and I have this whole dualistic aspect of myself. Why? You're not supposed to be like that. I've had people comment on me eating cucumbers. Well, if they're not these kind of cucumbers, Dr. CB doesn't approve of this, and da-da-da-da. And while it's so good to really know what's good for us, we have to really police ourselves in the way that we are upholding purity culture. The ways that we are upholding purity culture. And so just in general, when it comes to the New Age spiritual community, let's go back into manifestation. Let's go back into love and light. This idea that we must think the right things, that we must be the right way, that we must say the right things, and that we can have a little bit of darkness, but only the type of darkness that is consumable. Not the type of darkness that makes people uncomfortable. Not the type of darkness that makes people, oh, show me a little bit of a mirror of myself. How? No, I don't want to see this, right? We could only do the things that make other people comfortable. Everything else is not love and light. That's not love and light. You're not being love and light. The way that you're acting is not love and light. For you guys who are taking 7 C's, you already know Yemoja, the mother of all, in the Yoruba pantheon, she has many different iterations. She has Abu Okunte. She has Yemoja. She has all these different aspects. Some people could even say that Olokun is an aspect of Yemoja, depending on how you look at this ancient spiritual technology. And Olokun many times is seen as wrathful. And Abu Okunte was even birthed from sexual trauma, from a story, from Apetebi, from Yemoja. And she became even more powerful than Ogun. And so all these concepts about purity, they teach us to deny these aspects of ourselves, and they try to control us and make us think that, again, the power, the most powerful, the most powerful version of ourselves, it lies in more rules. It lies in being more strict. It relies in more discipline. And while discipline is amazing and discipline is essential, you have to make these decisions from a space of power and sovereignty, not from a space of self-resentment. Because if you continue to make decisions to submit to this, or to do this, or to be that, or to live in this way, what ends up happening is you'll resent the very thing that you thought put you in a cage. No, that thing did not put you in a cage. You decided to put the cage around yourself while listening to whatever rhetoric, by listening to whatever ideals. You start to hate it. You see people change constantly. You see people go from spirituality back to Christianity, to Islam, or to this, or to that, even to mysticism. And we're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, all in an effort to find your truth. But you're making these decisions from self-resentment. You keep blaming the last thing that you left. You keep blaming the last thing that you left, thinking that these things are the problem. No, the problem is the fact that we all have this deeply embedded religious trauma that teaches us that the power is outside of ourselves, that we shouldn't listen to our bodies, that we shouldn't listen to our intuition. The idea of original sin itself has been created as an effort to cut you off from the very divinity that lives within. This idea that you must reject your body, that you must follow something else or someone else, is a concept created to disconnect you from the divinity that lives here. And so these ideas of purity, culture, and love and light, and being consumable, and being right, and being perfect, and saying, again, the right things and the right affirmations at the right time, and 369, and then do this, and then do that, and da-da-da-da. And while these things may be beautiful tools, if they are picked from a space of power, but if they are picked from a space of resentment, then they will only act as poison to your ashe. And so that leads me to the last point of this video, which is the fact that your shadow is the initiator to your purpose. Your shadow is the initiator, is the shaman, is the way shower to your purpose. Why is that? Because we don't come into the totality, into the fullness of our being, until we understand all iterations of ourselves, until we understand all iterations of the energy that we naturally possess. It wasn't until I received my hand in Ifa that I started forgiving myself for being arrested, for being in that fight. You guys know my story, but for you guys who are new here, and there's a lot of folks who are new here. For you guys who are new here, I got into a really bad altercation in 2018. It was a terrible situation. And ended up police getting calls. I was the one who got arrested, got taken back to the police car, child, slept at the police station, all those kind of things. Had to go through court, was suspended from school, had to really start my life over because I had to find somewhere else to live. So I was homeless because I got into a fight with my roommate. And it wasn't until I got my hands in Ifa that I understand, or started to understand, all aspects of myself. My feet are Ogun, my head is Yemoja. Ogun, the most powerful warrior in Ifa, the one who will open your way, the one who's not afraid to cut down some trees, to cut down some trees, to make your way. Ogun is not just the way shower. Ogun is the one that we call on to slay our enemies. But depending on your intention is really dependent on what will happen. And so I say all this to say that Yemoja, who is the mother of compassion, who's the mother of all, who many people can say is inspiration for the Virgin Mary. She lives within me, and Ogun guides me as well. So these two ends of the spectrum. I spent so much of my life trying to fit myself into a mold. I spent so much of my life hating myself, hating everyone around me, being really deeply afraid. I grew up with a black dad and a white mom in country Louisiana. We were getting our mailbox blown up. People are constantly, sending us racist threats, and just living with that fear of safety. And then, of course, my mom's side of the family being very racist, always feeling rejected from my own family. I'm an only child. Well, I was an only child up until a few years ago, 2 years ago. Growing up as an only child and just wanting to feel safe, wanting to feel like I was accepted. On top of that, my father being in Iraq for most of my childhood. My parents met in the army. And so there was just so much confusion and so much fear, and a lot of sense of fear of safety, or feeling of fear of not being safe that I experienced rather when I was growing up. And then always feeling like I had to be better, do better, be a different person. And so then that all bubbled up and bubbled over when that altercation happened. I feel like I held in so much of my anger. I held in so much of what I was feeling. And then that happened, and it all bubbled over in 2018. And so literally from suppressing so much of myself for so long, I blew up. And it was in the darkest moments, it was in the worst time of my life, that I was able to realign with who I truly was. That I was able to really heal, that I was able to really get initiated into my energy and my purpose. And so your shadow is the initiator. Your shadow is the shaman. Your shadow is the guide. Your shadow is the way shower into your purpose. Because your purpose is not just the light aspects of you. It's the integration of the dark. Your purpose is the way in which you have alchemized your life in its totality. Your purpose is how God speaks through you, and God is not just light. God is also the darkness. God is the catalyst. God is the womb. God is the creation energy within the womb. God is the environment of the womb, and God is the masculine and feminine aspects in each one of ourselves. And so God is the creative force that decides to create something out of everything and nothing. And your shadow shows you exactly what aspects of yourself need to be initiated, integrated, and embodied in order for you to step fully into the complete iteration of you. But you can't do that without ridding yourself of purity culture. You can't do that without getting rid of these colonialist, dualistic ways of thinking that have only disconnected us from ourselves. You cannot do that without allowing yourself to just release. Yes, we know that God is love. Yes, anyone in the spiritual community can tell you that, but why is it that we feel disconnected from God in times in which we do not feel love? Why is it that we may feel disconnected from God in times that we feel anger or darkness or sadness? Because the same rhetoric of purity culture lives within the New Age spiritual community. Meeting God is all, not just one iteration of it, allows you to further accept yourself. Because if God could possibly live with many different faces, then that means that possibly there are many different ways for you to be and embody as well. And possibly, maybe, all of those different ways are valid. All of those different ways are inherently accepted. When you convince people that their God is demonic, You convince them also that their minds, spirits, and bodies are unsafe spaces. You convince them to demonize themselves. The way that we see God directly affects our relationship with ourselves and our self-image. And that same self-image directly affects what we create in this world. Because we are meant to be the hands and fingers of God. We are meant to be the ways that God works in this earth, on this earth. But we can't do that until we see God within all of us and all aspects of ourselves. And spirituality and healing is not becoming a new person. It's realizing the wholeness that's already there. So your shadow is the initiator, the shaman, the guide into your purpose, because only your shadow can show you what aspects of yourself you've been ignoring. And those very pieces of yourself that you've been ignoring are the exact perfect pieces for your alignment, for your destiny, to become the totality of who you are, to reach your full potential. Yes, there is a potential to reach, one that involves no centering, self-judgment, or self-resentment, one that involves complete and total expression of your unique authenticity. That is your true potential. It's going to be different for everybody. So if you want to learn more about this, How to Find Your Purpose 2.0, How to Find Your Purpose and Meet God in the Process, free ebook is in my bio. And we start Hidden Divinity on April 27th. So I'll see you there.